I can answer your question about whether EMI can make you smarter. I have a little story. Saturday night, my wife and I were able to get a babysitter. We went out, had a nice dinner, had a lovely time. I'm driving home and kind of do the things that you do when you don't have three voices chirping in your ears. We were talking about my upcoming schedule coming down here for the ARC conference and trying to, just kind of saying what I was going to be talking about. And really, without any prompting, she comes out and she says, you don't give yourself enough credit. You're the smartest guy that I know. Isn't that lovely? Isn't that? Me, being who I am, the first thing that came out of my mouth was, you really need to broaden your circle of friends. So I'm going to tell you a story today of a small company meeting the needs of a multi-billion-dollar industry. And yesterday, I was compared to the bookend. Last year, you heard Lloyd Cosgrove from Dow talk about NWA's Focus EMI, and this is the same system that they're using. Palmer Foundry is based in Massachusetts. We're a Tier 2 supplier of aluminum castings to highly demanding applications. We're a discrete manufacturer. It's privately owned, and to say that we have less than $1 billion in annual sales is an exaggeration. It's much less than that. We operate with 75 employees in a 60,000 square foot complex on about 6 acres. And of those 75 employees, 80% are shop floor or maintenance employees. So we have very low overhead in the office. Our castings range from 1.5 ounces to 1,500 pounds in 4 different aluminum alloys. We make vacuum-tight chambers for the semiconductor industry, stress-free, dimensionally stable castings for the optics industry, ultra-clean castings for medical devices and analytical industries such as mass spectrometers, and highly ductile, defect-free castings for industrial hoists, any application where you want to make sure you don't drop a load on your head. We also make casting components for the power industry. Our customers are very demanding. We sell to half of the top 15 semiconductor capital equipment manufacturers. So where does that leave us? About 3.5 years ago, we had some issues. The biggest issue was customer-required competency. Semiconductor capital equipment is sold with a performance guarantee. So that means they need to be up 99.9999% of the time. You folks in the process industry can appreciate that. The performance guarantee is, after a line goes down for 2 hours, they get fined $100,000 an hour until it gets fixed. So what do? They turn around and look upstream, and they say, well, every one of our subcontractors has to be on our approved vendor list. They have to be qualified. And they look at every component that goes into their equipment, and the castings are the heart of it. Basically, everything is hung off of our castings. So what they want us to do is show that we understand what the critical raw material parameters are, what the critical in-process parameters are, and what the critical end product parameters are. And then we have to show that we were capable of meeting those specifications and that our processes were in control. We needed records of this as well because they really follow Reagan's adage of trust but verify. We were explicitly told that delivering good products was not good enough anymore. And when there were issues with a casting, whether they were a real issue or not, we could no longer go in and say, trust us, we know what we're doing. We had a purchaser explicitly tell us, you foundries, you just can't live by that black magic anymore. So we had a lot of work to do with the ultimate goal of being on their approved vendor list, which really opens up our visibility within their corporations, within their purchasing programs, and makes a much more opportunity for us to sell castings. So some of the other issues we were having were our scrap and rework rates. Our overall enterprise scrap rate was right around 2%, which isn't that bad. However, we didn't have a good visibility on which lines were making that scrap or what our rework rate was. We can do cosmetic weld repairs to save our castings, but the problem is any rework, it's cutting off of our bottom line. We didn't have any statistical process monitoring or control, and in order to drive our scrap and rework rates down, we needed a way to measure our processes and tell us how they were performing. We also had to address the demands of those customers that I spoke of earlier, because part of becoming on their approved vendor list is the expectation that we have continual improvement and get higher and higher scores every year. They explicitly told us that you need an SPC program in place. We needed a program that would cover the whole supply chain from raw materials all the way to the dock. And as it turns out, it was EMI. I didn't realize that's what it was called at the time. Neither did our customers, but that's really what they were driving us towards. So the promise of EMI is total awareness and control of the complete manufacturing system. In the supply chain, EMI satisfies the need to ensure that our critical raw materials are within specification before they're shipped and enter our process. EMI allows us to communicate the state of our supply chain and that process down to our customers. From the process management improvement standpoint, EMI lets us know the status of our process in-house and prevents us from wasting resources on working on defective products in our stream. Our EMI system notifies us when our processes are trending out of control so we can take corrective actions before we start making defective product. On the business management and improvement side, we also use it to monitor our KPIs, such as on-time delivery, which is critical to our customers. And by that, we always were very confident in being able to say we sell perfect metal quality. That's what we put a stake in the ground. Palmer Foundry provides you with the cleanest metal that you can get. Turns out, that's like you going to, for our customers, it's like you going to a auto dealer and say, I want a car with 4 tires. You're going to get that. You expect that. So what was important to our customers was on-time delivery. So that became one of our key process indicators. Also from the management side, we look at things such as backlog, bookings. We've also applied it to our EH&S aspect. We look at days without an accident, lost time accident. These KPIs are graphed and shared all the way from company ownership down to the guys on the shop floor. They're posted in our break rooms. And they're also used for our incentive programs as well. So with Focus EMI in place, our data is readily available. It's accessible to the end user, presentable to all levels of the organization with little need for us spending time to manipulate the data and generate the output. In our organization of 75 people, that saved us hundreds of man-hours per year. So what were the challenges? In the 60 years that Palmer Foundry has been in business, we became really good at collecting data off of the floor. We had data stored in 3-ring binders. We had it stored in multiple Excel spreadsheets and other disparate databases. Some of them were available on our network, and some of them were not. Typically, the data was recorded and rarely, if ever, looked at again. And that's why I call it a data tomb versus the data repository, which you've heard before. So we needed a solution that could establish and maintain these operating links to these disparate databases, and we needed to eliminate the need for any redundant databases which would tie up maintenance and IT resources. Before I started at the Foundry, there was no SBC expertise on site. We had very little discipline in looking at the data on a regular basis and then interpreting it into knowledge. And really, the data was only reviewed to see if our process or raw materials were in specification. There was no analysis to look to see if the processes were in control, if they were trending out of control, if it was naturally varying, or we had something that was unnatural. Some of the data was charted for years on a single chart, and there was no allowance for changes in the process, changes in process settings, so it really was not, like I said, there was no SBC expertise at the time. And as I said earlier, this was one of the areas that our customers were pushing us towards, but it was really not realistic to think that our staff could add SBC chart development and maintenance on above what their normal job duties were. So we needed a system that was easy to set up, that was configurable versus the need for programming, and most importantly, understandable to a broad set of users. One of the reasons why we had stayed with spreadsheet data logging so long is we only have one part-time IT associate, so we couldn't tax them with having to maintain or establish a large enterprise system. We had a pretty small team, as you can gather by now, and in addition to determining what sort of resources we needed to get the system up and running, we also had to account for how many people do we need to do the training. How many people are we going to need to maintain the system long term? So that all cuts into the ROI of the project. We needed to solve the problem with a really tightly packaged commercial off-the-shelf system that could be reasonably configured and maintained within the context of everybody's normal job responsibilities. And it had to be tightly linked with our actual production data. We couldn't wait for months of lag time to get our data back out. So, luckily, there was a solution. We ended up going with Northwest Analytical Focus EMI server, and it addressed those challenges that we had. It uses our existing data sources, and it directly connects to the data sources without any need for data duplication. All the data passes through a ubiquitous analytics layer and crunches the numbers for us. We have role-specific dashboards that are delivered real-time to the appropriate users, and there's an alarming and notification service, which is an additional level to notify the people, the process owners, when there's an issue so they can deal with it immediately. This server and system was installed with the assistance of NWA tech support over the phone in one afternoon. That looks great for us. Obviously, I was pushing this project, so I had to make sure it's successful, and not tying up weeks of my IT person was a big win there. Internal IT support was used during that initial install and also to install the client tools on the user's desktop, and that was about the extent of their involvement. I then spent about a week configuring the reference manager, which is the tool that scans our databases periodically, and when it sees a new data point, it'll update the appropriate control chart. Spent some time configuring the client dashboards, which you'll see later, and configuring the notification service manager. That's the service that will send the email out when we've got a rule violation or a spec violation. So the result was 0 to full EMI capabilities in a little less than 3 weeks. And today, the system's running smoothly. We've had it up about 18 months now. No need for ongoing support. For the end user, it's not an intimidating product to use. There's a very short learning curve. Our data is consolidated into one standard output, and we've reduced the time and effort to deliver a better understanding of our process and to support our business decisions. And what we've been able to do is apply EMI to all parts of our production cycle, from our raw material suppliers to our in-process data collection and downstream to our end customers. And we've got value being realized through the entire production cycle. I'm going to go through a few of these instances in the next couple slides. So it helps us understand our suppliers and their processes, and it keeps us aware of their process drifting out of control. So there are two different raw materials that we use where we take virgin stock, bring it into our process, and then blend it with reclaimed materials. And this is sand and aluminum. So we have to monitor the state of the virgin sand coming in to make sure it's not drifting out of control. We're able to use Focus EMI to validate our certificates of compliance before the truck is even left the quarry, if you will, and deliver the material to us. Because it's, as you know, again, people in the process industry understand this. Once you put it in your process, you really can't get it back out. We use all of the components of Focus EMI to monitor it and notify it if it's drifting out. And this chart here is an example of a sieve analysis, which the parameters of the sand. And you can see our vendor was bumping along pretty good here. And this instance here, you can see we hit up against the upper spec limit. And that little Bible icon indicates that the process owner was notified, went in, acknowledged it, and decided to accept the load and blend it into our process. What's great is when we get audited by our customers, we can show them this chart and then drill down and show them the record that we took action to prevent anything going on in our process. Another place we use it for our raw materials is our ingot supply. And again, this is an instance where we get certificates of compliance sent to us before the shipment. And one shipment, we had an instance where the titanium element in this shipment of ingot was below the lower specification limit. And in this case here, the process owner, again, decided to accept the shipment and make a change to our recipe on the floor. Titanium is one of the elements that we manually add back into the process. We strip it out and we add it back in. So you can see we had a dip, a little bit of overcorrection, and then stabilize our process again. So if we hadn't caught this in time and let that ingot with low titanium go into our process and make castings, and then the castings got out the door, there's a few things that we would have had to have done. We would have to have remade the parts because they were out of industry specifications. We would have had to have contacted our customers, which is probably only the second worst thing you have to do, is tell them that you shipped them bad product. And then we may have had to issue a recall on those industrial hoists and lifts. Metal quality is paramount. So by avoiding those problems, we saved about $750,000 of lost production. Using Focus EMI has really impacted our relationship with our vendors. They now know that we are more savvy, and we're holding them to task to deliver us what we want when we want it. For the in-process results, we definitely get timely notification of any issues that happen. What you're looking at here is a control chart of resin that we mix in with our sand to hold our molds together. And what we do is calibrate the system on a weekly basis to maintain a certain ratio of resin to sand. Why that's important is if we don't have enough resin in the sand mold will break, which is something you don't want to happen when it's full of molten aluminum. If there's too much resin in the sand, we can't get the sand off of the casting after it's solidified. So in this instance here, our process owner was notified that we had an out-of-control point. He went in, looked at it, said, yeah, that doesn't look right. Let's retest it. It was retested, and it came back in as a correct value. Temperature is another critical process parameter for us. And basically what we want to do is pour the metal as cold as possible. And the reason for that is so we don't have a chance of shrinkage porosity. Problem is if you pour it too cold, it could solidify before your mold is completely full. So this here is an example of part-specific information that is entered by our melt operators on the floor, populates our quality system database. Focus EMI scans it and sends any notifications that are necessary to the process owner. This particular graph here was used to show a customer that although we did have one out-of-control point, the process itself was well within our specification limits. I had spoken about scrap and rework earlier. We are tracking scrap on a weekly basis by each molding line and weld repair on a monthly basis. And what we're also doing is segregating internal scrap versus scrap that's discovered outside at a machine shop. So we set targets a little bit lower than that. But what we also found is we were reworking over 35% of our large castings, which is incredibly bad from a productivity standpoint. So we've set targets to reduce that. And again, these charts are out right on the plant floor so the operators can see how they're affecting our business. So one of the worst things that can happen is shipping bad product out. I said actually that was the second to the worst thing, is shipping a bad product out. I think the worst thing that can happen is you ship something out and then the customer discovers that it's bad. So not only are we going to have to replace the defective product, we're going to have to spend a lot of time rebuilding that relationship. Jim from General Mills was talking about maintaining the brand, the reputation of the brand. We really live and die on word of mouth. So to have a bad casting get into the customer's hand, or even the perception of a bad casting get into the customer's hand, and have that message get out uncontrolled is horrible for us. So what EMI does is it prevents us from shipping this bad product. We're able to use this historical data that we collected from our process, run it through the analytics, determine appropriate specification limits, and then apply them to our control charts. We're also able to use EMI to make process changes to make them more stable over time. And by tracking the parts through every step of the process, we minimize or eliminate the possibility of sending that bad product out the door. So, as I said earlier, castings go into these multi-million-dollar pieces of capital equipment. And if you're the manufacturer of this equipment and Palmer Foundry comes knocking on your door and says, hey, you know, you're machining these chambers out of solid aluminum, you're throwing away a lot of these chips, it's very expensive, we can sell you a near-net shaped part that will meet your needs. If you're that design engineer, you're really not going to stick your neck out until you can be sure that you have little or no risk, even if it is saving you money. So we're able to use Focus EMI to show existing customers, as well as potential customers, that we do have an in-control process, and we are capable of meeting their needs. One way that we've been able to demonstrate our quality and our competency occurred last summer. Historically, when there's an issue at a machine shop, and the casting's blamed for this issue, the foundry really couldn't pull the information together to demonstrate that the part was made correctly. The best we could do was say that, well, you machined the part before it and it was okay, you machined the part after it and it was okay, so the one in the middle was good, right? Yeah, that's good. That's not going to fly, of course. So I think the machine shops knew that a typical foundry, not just Palmer, really didn't have a leg to stand on when it came to analytics and process monitoring and process control. We were not able to objectively state our case and back it up. So last summer, there was an issue during vacuum leak check. And this is a test that's done after machining, where these chambers are blanked off and a very high vacuum is pulled on it. And it's a test to test both the integrity of the metal as well as the machining. And to give you an idea, if a blank off plate is the O-ring in those places touched with your finger, you get some finger grease on it, it'll fail the test. So it's a very strict test to do. So there was a casting, actually there was a few castings that failed the test, and the machine shop, who's the tier 1 supplier, went to the end customer and said, we can't make delivery because there's something wrong with the castings. And of course the customer didn't like to hear that, and they got involved for a root cause analysis. And what we were able to do this time is pull together all of our information from our EMI system and present them with a clear, objective, and comprehensive view of all of our raw materials, all of our in-process data, and our end product characteristics, and show them that every casting in this entire production run was produced under the same set of conditions, both environmentally, through the process, and the raw materials. So, showing them that, we were able to produce that in a matter of hours. We gave them that, showed them there's no out-of-control points. And it was a great case of the tables being turned. So the end customer said, you know what, they do know what they're doing. We're going to go back and look at that machine shop again. And they were the ones doing the tap dance, saying that nothing's changed, nothing's changed, nothing changed. Well, as it turned out, the problem really ultimately was at the machine shop. They machined the walls too thin, and when you have a wall that's too thin, it's going to crack and leak. The end customer was very happy that that cause was found, and they appreciated how easy it was working with us and how we presented ourselves as a highly qualified and competent vendor. Being able to objectively communicate our process performance prevented us from having to absorb $70,000 worth of scrap castings. And that doesn't even count the additional time, effort, and labor to replace those castings. So ultimately, we did reach approved vendor status, and we received that email from the customer, which I'm sure you've all read while I've been up here talking. It has been a very, very positive experience for us. So we've had some unexpected results as well with regards to company management. after we were using the EMI system for about 10 months on our process side, we applied it to our business systems as well. So we use it for our critical management decision support. I mentioned earlier we look at our sales figures, we look at customer satisfaction such as on-time delivery and external scrap, productivity, shipment dollars per hour, % overtime, and I mentioned EH&S as well. These same dashboards are used for every decision maker in the company, and it helps us manage how we allocate resources, where we spend our capital money, and we can use it to determine if the decisions that we made positively impacted the business or negatively impacted the business. What we do when we have a potential customer come in, we have them come on site, we take them on a tour of our facilities, and we sit down in the conference room and we give a presentation. And now, showing them our EMI system and showing them our data historian and the improvements we made in the Foundry takes up about half of that presentation. Every one of the customers leaves that conference room saying, you guys are doing something that nobody else in the Foundry industry is doing, especially at a company of our size. And it's won us work. So the next steps for us are to expand the application to bring them further across the enterprise. We're looking at doing part-specific dashboards and part-specific notification on these high-value parts. By catching any trending of a process on a part-specific scale, will notify us well before that 11th hour it's at the dock, I need to ship it out. Stretch goal for me is to install digital kiosks out on the production floor so that our melt operators can see these control charts real time and do timely notifications of that. We're also looking at installing the knowledge base, which is a way to accumulate and then disseminate that knowledge. We talked a lot about the aging workforce. They're going to take that information. Somebody said it really good yesterday. You know, this machine's vibrating. It's not working well. What do I do? Well, you go to that bolt and you turn it 3/4 of a turn to the left and the problem goes away. Knowledge base will be a repository for that information. It'll be searchable by what symptoms you're having. And it's a really a good way, again, to get stuff off of paper and into an electronic system that's visible across the organization. So this EMI system has enabled us to compete effectively in the marketplace where we really want to grow, and it gives us that leverage. So what I want you to take away from this presentation is that for small organizations, implementing a useful EMI system is absolutely attainable. If you're a large organization that's pushing your upstream suppliers to put in an EMI system to become a qualified and technically competent supplier, you know, I think a lot of times, we'll call us the little guys, we get pretty intimidated about what we're supposed to do. But again, this is an example of something that we can do to become technically competent, speak the same language of much larger industries, and get us to the next level. Thank you so much, and I look forward to talking to you at the end.